I never imagined I would be the person writing one of these stories, but after everything that happened, I think putting it into words is the only way to finally leave it behind. For years I believed I had the kind of relationship people envied. My fiancée, Emma, and I had been together for 6 years. We met in college, survived long distance after graduation, and slowly built a life together. We had an apartment, a dog, wedding invitations already printed, and a venue booked for the following spring. Everyone told us we were the perfect couple. Looking back now, I realize people only saw the version we showed them. They never saw the small cracks that kept growing until everything collapsed. At first those cracks seemed harmless. Emma started working longer hours at her new marketing job, and I was busy trying to earn a promotion. We barely had dinner together during the week, but I convinced myself that was simply what adulthood looked like. Every time I mentioned spending more time together, she smiled, kissed my cheek, and promised things would settle down soon. The only person who seemed around almost as much as Emma was my best friend, Ryan. We had known each other since we were 12. He was practically family. He helped me move into every apartment I had ever rented, stood beside me during difficult times, and was supposed to be my best man at the wedding. Emma and Ryan got along well from the beginning, which made me happy. I always believed the people you love should also love each other. Sometimes the three of us would have dinner together or spend weekends watching movies. I never once questioned their friendship because I trusted them completely. That trust made me blind to things that, in hindsight, should have been obvious. Ryan suddenly started showing up whenever I was working late. Emma laughed a little harder at his jokes than she did at mine. They developed inside jokes I didn't understand. Whenever I walked into a room, conversations would stop for a split second before starting again. Each moment was small enough to ignore, so I ignored all of them. Everything began to change because of something incredibly ordinary. One Friday evening, Emma left her smartwatch charging on the kitchen counter while she took our dog for a walk. The watch lit up with a message preview. I wasn't trying to snoop. I only looked because I thought it might be from her sister about wedding planning. Instead, I saw a message that simply read, "Last night was worth the risk. I already miss you." My stomach tightened instantly. The sender's name wasn't visible because the notification was cut off. For a few seconds I convinced myself there had to be some innocent explanation. Maybe it was from a coworker joking about a late-night project. Maybe I had misunderstood. Before I could read anything else, the screen locked. When Emma returned home, she grabbed the watch without noticing I had seen the notification. I spent the entire evening pretending ever was normal while my mind replayed those 7 words again and again. Over the next week I became someone I barely recognized. I wasn't proud of it, but I started paying attention. I noticed Emma suddenly placing her phone face down whenever we ate together. She took calls in another room. She changed her password after years of leaving it unlocked around me. Every suspicious detail added another piece to a puzzle I desperately hoped I was assembling incorrectly. I even apologized to myself for doubting her. Then Ryan canceled our usual Saturday basketball game because he claimed he was visiting his parents. Later that evening I drove past a small cafe to grab coffee and saw his car parked outside. Through the window I saw him sitting across from Emma. They weren't holding hands or kissing. They were just talking and smiling. Still, either of them had mentioned meeting each other. When I texted Emma asking if she wanted dinner, she replied that she was still working late at the office. That was the first lie I could prove. I didn't confront either of them. Instead, I quietly left the cafe before they noticed me. My heart wanted answers, but another part of me wanted certainty. If I accused them without proof, they could deny everything and make me feel guilty for questioning them. So I stayed silent. The next several days felt unreal. I smiled during meetings, answered emails, joked with coworkers, and even discussed wedding decorations with Emma's parents while secretly wondering whether my entire life was built on a lie. Sleep became impossible. Every night I stared at the ceiling asking myself the same question. Was I becoming paranoid, Or was the person I loved betraying me with the one friend I trusted more than anyone else? The answer came sooner than I expected. One evening Emma told me she had a last-minute work presentation and would be home after midnight. About an hour later Ryan texted me asking if I wanted to play an online game because he was stuck at home with nothing to do. Their stories should have comforted me, but instead they fit together too perfectly. On impulse, I drove past Ryan's apartment. His car wasn't there. Then I drove past Emma's office. The building was dark except for security lights. Her car wasn't in the parking lot either. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. Deep down I already knew. I just didn't know where they were. That night I made a decision that changed everything. Instead of exploding with anger, I promised myself I would stay calm until I knew the full truth. If they were cheating, they had probably been lying for months. A few more days wouldn't matter. I would collect every piece of evidence I could find, protect myself legally and financially, and only then would I confront them. It was the hardest promise I had ever made because every instinct told me to call them immediately. But I stayed silent. Neither of them had any idea that my trust had begun to disappear. They laughed with me, planned wedding details, and talked about the future while I quietly watched every word and every move. I had no idea that what I was about to discover would be even worse than I imagined, and by the time the truth finally came out, our wedding wouldn't be the only thing getting cancelled. The following week became the longest of my life. Every smile I forced felt fake, and every conversation with Emma or Ryan felt like a performance. I hated pretending nothing was wrong, but I knew I couldn't act until I understood exactly what was happening. I started paying attention to little details that I had ignored for months. Emma suddenly cared much more about her appearance before certain late meetings. Ryan, who had never been interested in expensive clothes, started dressing far better whenever he claimed he was going out with coworkers. Even stranger, both of them seemed to disappear at the same times. Once is a coincidence. Twice is suspicious. By the fifth or sixth time, I couldn't convince myself anymore that I was imagining things. One Friday, Emma told me she was attending a company dinner that would last most of the evening. She even showed me a professionally designed invitation on her phone. Everything looked legitimate. I wished I had believed it. Instead of going home after work, I parked across the street from her office building. Employees slowly walked out in small groups until the parking lot was nearly empty. Emma finally appeared, but she wasn't dressed for a business dinner anymore. She changed into a casual outfit before leaving the building. A few minutes later Ryan's car pulled up beside the entrance. She got into the passenger seat without hesitation, and they drove away together. My heart sank. I kept enough distance to avoid being noticed while following them across town. They eventually stopped outside a quiet restaurant near the river. Through the large windows I watched them laughing over dinner. They looked comfortable, relaxed, like two people who had done this many times before. I kept telling myself there was still a chance I was misunderstanding everything. Friends have dinner together. Coworkers become close. Maybe there was another explanation. Then Ryan reached across the table and took Emma's hand. She smiled in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me for months. A few moments later she leaned across the table and kissed him. It wasn't a quick mistake or an awkward accident. It was the kind of kiss shared by people who believed nobody was watching. At that moment every excuse I had made for them disappeared. I felt strangely calm instead of angry. The worst part wasn't even the kiss itself. It was realizing that both of them had looked me in the eyes countless times while hiding this from me. I took several photos from outside before quietly leaving. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation in a restaurant. I wanted answers, but more importantly, I wanted proof. When I got home, I copied the photos onto my laptop and locked them away. I barely slept that night. Emma returned just after midnight carrying leftovers from a restaurant she claimed her coworkers had visited after the meeting. She kissed me on the forehead and apologized for being late. I thanked her for bringing food home, smiled politely, and wondered how someone could lie so naturally. She never noticed that I already knew where she had really been. The next morning I called my older sister, Mia. She had always been the person I trusted most whenever life became complicated. Without saying much over the phone, I asked if I could visit her. The moment I arrived, she knew something was wrong. I showed her the photos and explained everything that had happened over the previous week. She stared at the screen for several seconds before quietly asking, "Are you absolutely sure?" I nodded. She hugged me without saying another word. Eventually she suggested something I hadn't considered. Before confronting anyone, I should make sure our finances were protected. Emma and I shared a wedding savings account and had already paid deposits for the venue, photographer, and caterer. If things became ugly, I didn't want thousands of dollars disappearing overnight. Over the next few days I contacted vendors one by one. Most deposits weren't refundable, but several could still be partially recovered if cancelled early enough. I quietly moved my personal savings into an account that only I could access and made copies of every financial document we shared. It felt cold and calculating, but I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who had broken our relationship. I was simply preparing for the consequences of someone else's choices. Every practical step hurt because it forced me to accept that the wedding I had spent years dreaming about was never going to happen. Then something happened that removed any remaining doubt. Ryan accidentally sent me a text message that clearly wasn't meant for me. It read, "Same hotel next Thursday?" He still has no idea. Less than 5 seconds later the message disappeared because he had deleted it for everyone. Unfortunately for him, I had already read it. A minute later my phone rang. Ryan sounded nervous. He laughed awkwardly and claimed he had been texting one of his coworkers about a business trip. His explanation made no sense, but I played along. I told him not to worry and even joked about sending messages to the wrong person. After hanging up, I saved a screenshot of the notification. His panic told me everything I needed to know. That Thursday I took the day off work without telling anyone. Around lunchtime Emma texted me saying she would be staying overnight in another city for an important client presentation. Ryan also mentioned he had to travel for business. Their stories matched almost perfectly again. Using the reservation information visible in Ryan's accidental message preview, I managed to find the hotel they were likely meeting at. I parked across the street and waited. Less than 30 minutes later, Ryan arrived. 10 minutes after that, Emma walked through the front entrance carrying a small overnight bag. They greeted each other with a hug before disappearing toward the elevators. I didn't follow them upstairs. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. Sitting alone in my car, I realized the relationship I had spent 6 years building was already over. The only thing left was deciding how and when everyone else would find out the truth. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of humiliation, but I refused to let them rewrite the story and make me the villain after everything they had done. They had lied to my family, her family, our friends, and everyone planning to celebrate our wedding. If the truth was going to come out, it would come from me, with evidence that nobody could deny. Driving home that evening, I looked at the unopened box containing our wedding invitations stacked neatly on the dining table. Just a month earlier they represented the happiest chapter of my life. Now they felt like reminders of a future that no longer existed. I picked one up, read our names together for what would probably be the last time, and quietly placed it back in the box. The confrontation was coming, and once it happened, none of our lives would ever be the same again.